Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to the next video in this ongoing tutorial series related to installing different operating systems. So this is actually going to cover our Phase 4 tutorial in this ongoing series that we had mapped out in the beginning. And previously we did a dual boot, actually a triple boot, but we installed Linux Mint Desktop Edition alongside our existing Linux server install and our Windows 7 installation. So we're going to pick up from there, and actually inside of our Windows 7 we're going to download some software and begin using virtualization to allow us to create different operating system environments that we can interact with at the same time that we are using our Windows 7. So the first thing we need to do is download some software, but actually if you've been following along with my tutorial, you may have just downloaded and installed a fresh copy of Windows 7. And if that's the case, what you want to do is make sure you have some antivirus running. So the first thing you can do is go to any antivirus that you may have laying around or want to purchase, or alternately you can use this free version of Avira. And the website, at least in the US, is us.avira.com/home. And once you get there, you can go ahead and download the free version, and that'll begin downloading. So let me just cancel this because I already have it. And you go ahead and install that, and you shouldn't have to put any information in. It may at some point pop up and ask you to insert your name and a whole bunch of information. There's probably going to be a little checkbox somewhere that you can deselect and just move on with the installation. So don't worry about that. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to register anything. Just download and install it and set it up. So once that's done, or if you already have antivirus, you can move on and just go to the Virtualbox website. And let me just backtrack here. So we go to virtualbox.org and we go over here to downloads. You want to pick your host platform. In this case, we're going to be using Windows. So we click this link here and it'll begin downloading VirtualBox. Again, I already have this, so I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that. And finally, you want to make sure that you have a copy of, in this case, Ubuntu, because that's what we're going to be using, but any operating system ISO file or installation CD at the ready. So again, if you want to use Ubuntu and follow along with this tutorial, we can go to www.ubuntu.com/download/desktop, and I'm going to be using the 12.04 long-term support. Now, since we're creating a virtual machine, we really don't need to allocate more than 4 gigabytes for that virtual instance. And so really we can just use the recommended 32-bit. So go ahead and click this link. It's going to ask you for a donation. You can, by all means, choose to contribute, or alternately just slide these back to 0 and go ahead and follow through with the download. Now again, I already have this, so I'm not going to keep going with that. But once you have all of these things downloaded and at the ready, you can go ahead and start to install them. So when you do the VirtualBox installation, it's going to ask you a few times, a little pop-up will come up and ask you if you want to allow some software to be installed. What it's really doing is asking you if you want to install the necessary drivers for the various different components on your system. So these would be things like your USB drivers and CD-ROM drivers and different drivers for the hardware that your computer is going to bridge with the virtual machines that you create. So you can go ahead and just click yes in each of those cases. Now, once all of that completes, it'll ask you if you want to start VirtualBox at the close of the program. So you go ahead and allow it, and you should end up with a screen that looks somewhat like this. Now, yours isn't going to have these various different virtual machines because you haven't created any yet. So the first thing you're going to want to do is create a new virtual machine. So we'll go up here to this new icon and click it. Now it's asking us to name our operating system. So let's just go ahead and name ours Ubuntu 12. And now you need to pick which type of operating system it is. Is it Windows, Linux, any of these options here? We're going to be doing Linux, of course. And now you can select from the various different distributions. In this case, we want Ubuntu based, and we're going to be doing 32-bit. So just leave the default Ubuntu. So go ahead with next, and here it's going to ask us how much memory we want to allocate to it. This is how much RAM in megabytes. So let's say we want to allocate 1 gigabyte. And really quickly, what you can do just to make sure you have that much room, if you go to your Start menu and you right-click your computer, go to Properties, you can see here it's going to tell you how much memory you have available on your system. In this case, I have 12 gigabytes, and really Windows 7 requires somewhere along the lines of 2 gigabytes to function smoothly. So really take away 2 gigabytes from this number if you're using Windows 7, so that leaves us with 10 gigabytes. So we can allocate up to 10 gigabytes for this virtual machine that we're creating. Since we're using 32-bit for our virtual OS, we're going to be limited to 4 gigabytes anyway. But regardless, we don't really need that much. So let's just go ahead and say 1024, which is 1 gigabyte, and move on to next. Now we need to create a hard drive to attach to this system. So the way this gets handled, essentially you're just creating a file inside of Windows that's going to serve as the hard drive for this virtual computer that we're going to create. So create a virtual hard drive now. We'll go ahead and create one. And here it's giving us a whole bunch of different options. And the default one is a VDI, or Virtualbox Disk Image. So unless you have a reason to do otherwise, you can just go ahead and select the default one. And now it asks us dynamically or fixed in size. Dynamically means that it's going to initially allocate a certain amount of space for us, and then as you start to save more files to it and require more space, it will grow that until it reaches the maximum limit that we're going to set in a minute. If we select fixed size, it's going to write all of the tables necessary and format the entire hard drive all at once. So this is going to take a little bit longer, but it's going to perform a little faster in the long run, whereas this is going to not use up as much space right away, and it's going to create it a little bit faster for us. So let's just go ahead with the dynamically allocated. Now it's asking us to name our virtual hard drive, so I'll just keep it in name with the virtual machine that we've created, so Ubuntu 12 is fine. And the default is 8 gigabytes, but that's usually kind of small. So let's go ahead and just say, I'm going to make it 20 gigabytes. You can give it more or less depending on how much space you have free on your system and how much you anticipate using it. In my experience, before you actually move forward from this, you should give it more rather than less, because once this runs out of space, you kind of run into a problem where you need to expand the size of this, and it's a long process. It's not impossible to do, but it's not the easiest thing to do either. So go ahead and just make it 20 gigs or more if you can. So we'll go ahead and create that, and now we have this virtual machine created. Before we start it, let's just take a look at what it entails, and we can get some basic details here. We know the name and operating system. We can see how much memory we've allocated, the boot order, which is something that we would normally set up in the BIOS on our system, some information about the processor and how it handles, the display. So this is how much our video card is allocated for memory. our storage, so it has a CD DVD drive which is empty right now, and it has a hard drive which is attached in this case using SATA to the SATA port 0. It's using the bridged Windows audio controller. It has a network card, so we can give it internet, and we'll see that we have to change some of these settings in a bit. It's got no USB drives attached to it. There's no shared folders between our host and this. And we haven't filled out any description information. So again, before we start it, let's go ahead and click Settings. And we can see if we go to System, we can actually change some of these settings. So if we want to change the memory at any point, we can do that later on. So we can just add more memory, which would be the same as opening up your physical system and adding more RAM chips. We can change different parameters and give our computer more processors. And we can attach more additional hard drives. Now that's not the same as expanding the size of the hard drive, but we can add a second or third hard drive additionally. And if we go to network, we can see we have some options here. We can do a NAT, network address translation. We can bridge our adapters between the Windows and our host, and our guest rather. So there's a few different options. Let's go ahead and just select our bridged adapter. And okay, so now we're going to be ready to actually start this thing. So the first time that you start it up, it's asking us to install a disk to install the operating system for it. And it's asking us for a location for it. So we can go ahead and select this and go into our computer, and if you had an installation CD or a USB, you could go ahead to My Computer and select that here. Or if you downloaded the ISO, which I did, we can go to the location of it on our computer. We want the 386, which is the 32-bit edition, 12.04 Ubuntu. Okay. And let's start it up. Okay, so it's mounting that image, and it's going to load it just as if we had put in an installation CD or USB into our physical computer, and start the installer running for us. So we'll just give it a second to pop up. So we want to go ahead and install Ubuntu. Do we have 4.5 gigabytes available? Yes, and it's connected to the internet. So let's just go ahead and continue. Now this might scare you a little bit. It's not going to erase anything on your Windows system. It's only going to erase and install Ubuntu to that closed VDI file that is acting as the hard drive for this virtual machine. So don't be afraid to go ahead and erase disk and install Ubuntu. And here you can just ensure that it's only doing that 21.5 gigabytes, which is that VDI hard drive that we had created. So we'll just install it there now. And that's good. Keyboard layout should all be pretty standard. Now it's asking you for a name, so I'll just go ahead and put that in. The name of your computer. That should be fine for now. And then just create a password. So Okay. This is the same standard process for installing Ubuntu on any desktop computer standalone. We're just doing it inside of this Virtualbox software. Okay, so now once your installation is complete, you'll have a screen like this. So go ahead and restart now. And now it's asking us to remove the disk from the tray. So Ubuntu in this case doesn't realize that you're installing this to a virtual machine. From its perspective, it thinks that you've actually just installed it to a regular standalone physical computer. So the way we can handle that, and if we go over here to machine, let's just go ahead and close this virtual machine, and we'll send the shutdown signal. Let's just power off the machine. So we can go to the virtual machine and go to settings, and now let's go to our storage, and we can see here that our drive is actually empty, so that's fine. So let's go ahead and we can right click and start, or alternately you can just click the start up here. So we'll start it up, make it full screen. And if you notice down here, you have a whole bunch of icons, and if you just hover over them, it indicates the activity of the hard disk, the virtual hard disk, the network, any USB devices, which in this case we have none that are attached. And here it says write control, and it indicates which key we would use to escape this. In some situations on some computers, you'll find that you kind of get stuck in here with your mouse and you can't get it back for Windows. If that happens, by default, if you just press the right control button, it'll give you your mouse back. So let's just go ahead and log in. Ooh. Now notice this isn't taking up our full screen here, and that we will fix in 1 minute. So once this opens up, let's go up here to devices, and down at the bottom, install guest additions. Okay, so this should pop up, and now allow it to run. It's going to ask for your password again. Well, while it's doing that, let's just go over some of the other options up here. If we go down the devices list, you can see our CD, DVD devices. We can mount various different ISO image files, or we can mount our host drives. So if we go to Windows, we can see that my Blu-ray drives are D and E. So I can go ahead and mount those and use any CD or DVD that I put inside that drive tray within my virtual machine here. Same thing with USB devices. I can mount any of these, so a printer, or if we were to put in a USB thumb drive, we could mount those and pass that into our virtual machine. Shared clipboard here, so we can actually copy something from a clipboard in our virtual machine and then paste it into our Windows. Or we can do drag and drop. Now, this creates kind of a little tunnel between the two, and it can be used to pass malware and other potentially dangerous files between them. So you want to use those with some caution. Same thing, we can go over to view, and we can view in full screen or scale mode. So while that's just going, let me do that. And if we were to do the scale mode without doing these VirtualBox guest editions, it looks kind of stretched out and faded at this point. So let's go ahead and hit return. And we're not going to actually, now we can't get to that original menu we had. So if I do control, right control, and the C button, we get back to that initial view we had. And again, this is full screen, so we can exit out of that. No, we don't want to exit. I'm sorry. Let's go back to this view here. And those guest additions that we installed are not going to actually show up until we restart. So let's go ahead over to our machine and do a reset. I'm sorry, let's do it right from Linux. So let's do shutdown, and we'll actually shut down the operating system. That'll close the virtual machine, and now we can start it back up again. Okay. What the hell? Oh. Well, alright. The guest editions, I guess I haven't done it in a little while, so I kind of forgot how to do it, but it's a little bit more in-depth of a process than I anticipated at first. So for now, this should be fine anyway. So now what we have is a fully functioning virtual machine, and we can use that alongside our Windows and operate within the two different environments at the exact same time. And there's no real limit except for our memory constraints to how many of these we can run at the same time. So if I wanted to go ahead and run, let's say, a different version of Ubuntu, and I also wanted to run, I'm not sure if this one's actually broken or not, copy of Windows XP, I can technically have all three of these at the exact same time. So now I have Windows 7, Ubuntu 10, Ubuntu 12, and now Windows XP all running at exactly the same time. And I can switch between them, or I can assign them all different IP addresses, and I can create my own little virtual network and start doing some testing. And if you want to do programming between them, if you wanted to, for example, do some security testing, whatever your goal is, you can achieve this using your own little homemade network from various different virtual machines. So really quickly, let's just, in our Windows host, if we go to the start menu and type in CMD for command prompt, and we'll hit enter. Let me just bring that down. Not sure why this is going so slowly. Probably going to open 100 of them now. Okay, so now let's do our IP config. And if we scroll up, we get the IP address of this Windows computer. Here it's 192.168.1.2. And now let's go back to our Ubuntu, click on our dash, and type in term for terminal. Open it up, and now we can do if config. And we can see we're on the same subnet, 192.168.1.13. So we have a separate IP address, even though we're technically using the exact same adapter through the same physical computer. And so we can identify these as two separate machines on our network, which is useful in some cases, especially if, for example, we were using this as a server to handle web traffic. We could pass all of our port 80 and port 443 web traffic directly to our virtual machine without really worrying about interfering with our Windows host. So go ahead and exit out of that, and now you can just mess around in here or close out of it as you want. Now, an additional thing that we can do is take a snapshot at any given point of our virtual machine. Now, this is handy if you're worried about messing something up. So let's say you have your computer, it's working exactly how you want, you have all your files. We take a snapshot, and we'll call this initial. Just set up. Okay. So now you want to go ahead and install some software and make some real configuration changes without worrying about screwing up your system. As long as we have that snapshot, we can always revert back to it. So let's say you're doing something and you really break it. Well, we can power this off. Let me exit out of here. We'll go back to our main Virtualbox. And here you can see snapshots. And so what we can do is restore from our snapshot. and we want to go ahead and start it. Now it may give us some kind of an error. Nope, it didn't. So it just restored it to exactly the point in time and configuration that we had when we took that snapshot. So it's a quick way of backing files up and backing up your save state. This way you don't have to really worry about breaking things. And that's why using virtual machines is great for doing certain tests if you're really uncertain what the results are going to be before applying those to actual physical computers on your network. So that about covers it for handling Virtualbox and virtualization in terms of GUI. In the next tutorial, we're going to do basically the same thing, but we're going to be doing this purely from the command line inside of our Ubuntu server. And since the Ubuntu server doesn't have any kind of graphical interface, we don't have the luxury of using this to create our machine. So we have to do all of it by hand. So let me just go ahead and exit this. And thanks for watching. You can check out the next tutorial.